When I saw my daughter-in-law's car parked outside my house that morning, when I knew she wasn't supposed to be there, something in me went cold. It was barely 6 in the morning. The sun was just a smear of pale orange behind the jacaranda trees outside my window. I remember standing in my kitchen, my hands wrapped around my chip blue mug, the one my husband used to call my thinking cup. The coffee had gone cold long before I realized I was staring out the window, unmoving. There it was, Lena's silver sedan, sitting crooked in my driveway. She didn't live here. She never had, but she had a key. At first, I tried to tell myself she might have dropped something off for my son Max. Maybe groceries, maybe a kind gesture. But the truth sat heavy in my stomach, thick and undeniable. Lena didn't do kind gestures. My husband, God rest him, used to say, Renata, keys are trust. Once you hand someone your keys, you hand them your peace. I didn't understand what he meant back then. But that morning, watching Lena walk out of my front door carrying a bag she hadn't come in with, I finally did. For as long as I could remember, my home had been the center of everyone's orbit. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and lemon polish. The hallway walls carried framed laughter, birthdays, graduations, small proud moments. After my husband died, those pictures became my companions. My son Max was my pride. I'd raised him alone after his father's passing. He was gentle, soft-spoken, the kind of boy who held doors open for strangers. When he met Lena, I told myself she must be special to make him smile like that again. But from the first dinner she came to, I felt it, that chill under the warmth of her words. She was polite, too polite. Her compliments felt like puzzles I couldn't quite solve. You've kept this place quaint, she had said, her eyes scanning my curtains, my floral dishes, the tiny scuffs on the wooden floor that I never had the heart to sand away. When they got married, I wanted to believe things would settle. I gave her a spare key to my house on their wedding day, tied to a small silver ribbon. I told her it was just in case of emergencies. I didn't know then that emergencies, in Lena's world, always seemed to benefit her. The other 2 keys, the ones that would later cause just as much pain, belonged to my brother and my sister-in-law. The brother I had trusted all my life, and the sister-in-law who had a way of making my home feel like it belonged to everyone but me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. At that time, I only knew that my mornings had become quieter. My son visited less often. Lena always had an excuse. He's busy with work, he's tired, he'll call you later. But it wasn't just that he was busy. He had changed, and it all started after those keys. The day I saw Lena's car, I didn't confront her right away. I waited until she left. She had that habit of locking up after herself, almost as if to show me that she knew my routines better than I did. When she drove off, I stepped outside. The cold air hit my face, sharp and sobering. My front door felt wrong. The brass handle was still warm. I turned it, half expecting it to stick the way it always did when the weather turned damp. But it opened easily, smoothly, as if freshly oiled. Inside, everything looked the same, and yet not the same. The vase of lilies on the table had been moved slightly. My kitchen towel hung on the opposite hook, and there was a faint smell of her perfume, powdery and sweet, lingering in the air like arrogance. I knew, deep down, she'd been going through my things. Still, I told myself I was imagining it. Grief does that to people. You start seeing ghosts in the small things. But when I opened the drawer under the counter, the one where I kept my emergency cash, my hands started trembling. The envelope was still there, but lighter. There should have been $500 inside. For emergencies. For a rainy day. There were only $300 left. I stared at that empty space in the envelope for a long time. My first instinct was denial. Maybe I'd used it and forgotten. Maybe I'd taken some out for groceries. But I keep records. I write everything down. And when I checked my notebook later that night, the last entry was from 3 months ago. A withdrawal of $50 for church donations. Nothing since. That was when I realized something had shifted in my life. Quietly, stealthily, like a draft under a closed door. And it started with a single, innocent key. That evening, I called Max. Did Lena come by the house this morning? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He paused before answering. Yeah, Mom. She said she was dropping off some paperwork for you. Didn't she tell you? I smiled, though he couldn't see it. No, she didn't mention. Oh, must have slipped her mind. Everything okay? Everything's fine, darling. Just checking. But everything wasn't fine. When we hung up, I stood there in the hallway, looking at my reflection in the glass frame of our old family photo. Me, Max, and my husband standing on the porch, grinning in the summer light. It hit me then how much of myself I had handed away, one small gesture at a time. A key here, a favor there, until my home, my sanctuary, no longer felt like mine. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in bed listening to the creaks of the old house, wondering how many times someone had walked those floors when I wasn't home. How many of my drawers had been opened. How many of my memories had been touched by hands that didn't belong. And something inside me whispered, there are 3 types of family members you should never give your house keys to. I just didn't know yet who all 3 were, but I was about to find out. The next morning, I woke up before dawn again. Sleep had become a stranger lately. I sat by the window with a shawl around my shoulders, watching the quiet street. 4 years, this neighborhood had been my comfort. Old houses with gardens full of hydrangeas, familiar faces walking their dogs, the mailman who waved even when I wasn't outside. It was safe, predictable, or at least it used to be. I had lived in that same house for over 30 years. My husband, Carl, and I bought it when Max was just a baby. I could still remember the sound sound of his little feet pattering on the wooden floors, the way Carl would hum while fixing something in the garage. Every corner of that home carried a memory, warm, imperfect, but mine. After Carl's death, I tried to keep everything the same. His tools still hung in the garage, neatly arranged just the way he left them. His gardening gloves sat folded by the back door. It made me feel like he hadn't completely gone, like the house still had a heartbeat. That's probably why I found it so hard to say no when family asked for things. They were all I had left, and loneliness, I've learned, can make you generous in the wrong ways. My brother, Hans, was the first person I ever gave a spare key to, long before Lena came into the picture. He lived 2 towns over and often stopped by to check on me. At least, that's what he said. In the beginning, I appreciated it. He'd fix a broken cabinet, mow the lawn, help me change a light bulb. But over time, I noticed his visits always came at the same time, right before the first of the month. He'd sigh as you walked through the door, talking about how tight things were at home, how unexpected expenses had come up again. And every time, I'd end up writing a small check or slipping a few bills into his hand. He never asked directly. That's the thing about family guilt. It doesn't need to ask. It just hovers until you offer. Then there was Ingrid, my sister-in-law, Hans's wife. If I'm honest, Ingrid and I were never close. She had a sharpness to her that always put me on edge. Every visit came with little criticisms wrapped in sweet tones. Oh, Renata, you still have this old sofa? How charming. Still cooking with butter? You're braver than I am. And somehow, despite her words always sounding polite, they left bruises I couldn't see. She had a way of making herself comfortable in my space, rearranging things for better flow, or clearing shelves she thought looked too cluttered. Once, I walked into my own living room to find her wiping down my coffee table, humming as though she lived there. When she and Hans asked for a spare key just in case, I hesitated. But they were family, and family, I told myself, deserve trust. Now, standing in the quiet of that morning, I realized how easily trust can turn into permission. A few days after finding the missing money, I decided to test something. I placed a new envelope in the same drawer, this one with $400 inside. I wrote down the amount in my notebook, sealed the flap, and left it there. Then I waited. For 3 days, nothing happened. The house stayed still, untouched. I started to think maybe I'd been paranoid. Then, on the 4th day, I noticed something strange. The front doormat, the one with faded lettering that said, "Welcome home," was crooked. It always sat perfectly straight because I was particular about little things like that. I bent down, adjusted it back, and noticed faint shoe prints on the tiles, a size smaller than mine. I checked the drawer. The envelope was there, sealed, but lighter. This time, $50 was missing. My stomach dropped. Someone with a key had been inside again. That evening, I called Hans. I kept my tone steady. "Were you or Ingrid here this week?" He chuckled. "No, why? Miss us already? Just wondering. Thought I heard something in the garage the other day." "Maybe a rat," he said. "You should call pest control." I smiled faintly. "Maybe I will." But I knew it wasn't a rat. It was betrayal. Small, quiet, deliberate. The hardest part of growing older isn't loneliness. It's the realization that the people you trust the most sometimes see your kindness as weakness. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a soft hum of the refrigerator in the background. The lamplight threw a warm glow across the room, highlighting the worn edges of my husband's old recipe book. I found myself flipping through its pages, searching for a sense of calm. Carl always said I worry too much. People can only take from you what you let them, he used to tell me. But what do you do when they take without asking? When they've already been handed the key? I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew one thing. I was done pretending not to notice. A few days later, I invited Max and Lena over for Sunday dinner. I cooked his favorite, roast chicken with herbs and garlic potatoes, and baked an apple pie that made the whole house smell like home. When they arrived, I watched Lena carefully. She walked in like she owned the place. Her heels clicked on the floor. Her perfume floated through the air before her voice did. "Smells amazing, Renata," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You've outdone yourself again." I noticed how she placed her purse on the counter, right next to the drawer. Max kissed my cheek, his eyes tired. "Work's been crazy," he said. "We barely get time together." I looked at him, my son who once used to call me just to share small joys, now sitting across from me like a polite stranger. During dinner, I watched how Lena talked, how easily she steered every conversation, how Max nodded along without noticing. And I realized she had a key not just to my house, but to my son's decisions, his thoughts, his trust. 3 people had my keys, 3 people I loved, and one by one, they were turning those keys into weapons. When they left that night, I stood by the window again, watching their car fade into the dark street. The clock on the wall ticked softly. I didn't know it yet, but the next time that car came into my driveway, it wouldn't be for dinner. It would be the day everything unraveled. The next week, a storm rolled in. The sky was bruised gray, the kind of color that makes you feel things you can't name. I spent most of the day inside, watching the rain streak down my kitchen window. Every so often, a car passed by, headlights slicing through the fog. I tried to distract myself with chores, folding laundry, watering my plants, organizing the pantry, but my mind kept circling back to that envelope, that missing money, those footprints on the tile. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe it was just forgetfulness or bad memory. That's what I told myself every time doubt crept in. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I wasn't losing my mind. I was losing my home, inch by inch. Late that afternoon, as the rain softened into drizzle, I decided to run a small small errand, drop off a letter at the post office. I grabbed my coat, locked the front door, and double-checked it, the way I always did. Then I left. It took less than an hour. When I came back, the first thing I noticed was a smell. Not something strong, just faint, floral perfume, that same powdery sweetness I'd smelled before. My heart started to pound. I looked down and saw water marks on the mat inside the door, 2 small, wet footprints. Someone had been here. Again, I moved through the house, slowly listening. Nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of rain outside. But in the living room, there was something new. A coffee cup in the sink. I hadn't used one all day. And then, the final confirmation, my bedroom door, slightly open. I never leave that door open. I stepped closer, my breath shallow. The smell of my late husband's cologne, faint, lingering on his old jacket, mixed with that perfume. My hands trembled as I reached for the doorknob. Inside, drawers were open. My jewelry box sat crooked on the dresser. A few trinkets were missing, not valuable things, just small sentimental pieces. Carl's old cufflinks, a silver brooch from my mother, a gold ring I wore in my 30s. Not stolen for money, taken for the act itself. That night, I didn't call the police. I didn't even tell Max. I just sat on my bed, staring at the empty spaces where those things used to be. I told myself I'd get cameras installed, change the locks, something, but there was a hesitation inside me. A voice that said, what if you're wrong? What if this ruins everything? Because if I changed the locks, it would mean admitting I didn't trust my family. And I wasn't ready for that truth yet. The following Sunday, Hans and Ingrid came by unannounced. I opened the door and tried to smile. What a surprise! Hans handed me a small bag of groceries. Thought we'd drop by. Make sure you're doing okay with all this weather. His kindness used to comfort me. Now it made me wary. They moved through the house with casual familiarity. Ingrid went straight to the kitchen, Hans to the living room. Watching them felt strange, like seeing guests wander through a museum of your own life. House feels a bit drafty, Hans said, checking the window seals. You really should get these fixed. I will, I replied quietly. Ingrid opened the fridge. You're out of milk. We can pick some up next time. Her tone was too smooth, her eyes scanning every shelf like she was taking inventory. When they finally left, I found myself checking the drawer again. The envelope was still there, untouched this time. But my nerves were frayed. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about boundaries, invisible ones, crossed so casually that I barely noticed until they'd vanished. That night, I made tea and sat by the window again. The rain had stopped. The air was clear, sharp. I stared at the reflection of the house lights on the wet pavement and thought about how much of myself I'd given away trying to be kind. People talk about keys like they're just metal, but they're more than that. They're permission, a silent promise. And once you give that promise to the wrong person, they don't just open your doors, they start rearranging your life. 2 days later, I finally told Max about the break-ins, or at least part of it. Max, I said over the phone, have you or Lena been by the house when I wasn't home? He hesitated. Not that I know of. Why? Because things keep moving around. I think someone's been inside. He sighed, the kind of sigh that sounds more like impatience than concern. Mom, you probably just misplaced stuff. You worry too much. I'm telling you, something's not right. Mom, he said again, gentler this time. You're alone a lot lately. Maybe you just need company. I'll have Lena stop by more often, okay? That word, more often, hit me like a chill. No, I said quickly. No, that's not what I need. He didn't understand. Maybe he didn't want to. After we hung up, I sat there staring at the phone. I realized that was how it started. The slow erasing of credibility. The kind that happens to older women all the time. People stop believing your instincts. They start treating your fear like confusion. And once that happens, the people who want to take advantage of you, they know it. That night, I made my decision. I would get the locks changed, quietly, without telling anyone. It felt like reclaiming something small, a piece of control. I called a locksmith the next morning, asked for the earliest appointment. By noon, the old locks were gone, replaced with new brass ones that gleamed in the sunlight. When I held the new keys in my hand, they felt different, heavier somehow. Not just metal, but a line drawn. I put one on my keyring, one in the kitchen drawer, and one in my purse. No spares. For the first time in months, I exhaled fully. But peace, I would soon learn, doesn't last long in a house where betrayal has already made itself at home. Because 3 days later, when I came back from the market, my groceries still cold in my arms, the door was open again. And this time, it wasn't Lena's car in the driveway. It was Hans's truck. I stood at the gate for a long moment, clutching the grocery bags against my chest. Hans's old blue pickup sat in my driveway like a stubborn stain. Its hood was still warm. He'd arrived not long ago. At first, I thought maybe he'd come by to fix something again. Maybe he'd even seen the locksmith and got curious. But then I saw the front door slightly ajar, swaying with the afternoon wind. My pulse quickened. Hans! I called out, stepping carefully up the path. It's me, Renata! No answer. The sound of my shoes against the wet tiles echoed strangely, the way sounds do in a house that isn't quite yours anymore. Inside, the air smelled faintly of tobacco and engine grease, Hans's smell. But there was something else, too. Paper. The faint, musty scent of open drawers and disturbed files. When I turned the corner into my study, the sight stopped me cold. Hans was standing by my desk, rifling through my documents, the ones I kept neatly stacked in a brown folder labeled property deeds and wills. For a second, he froze like a child caught doing something wrong. Then he smiled, too quickly. Oh, Renata, you startled me. I put the bags down slowly. What are you doing here? He gestured awkwardly at the papers. I was just looking for the copy of Dad's old watch certificate. You remember the one? Thought it might still be here. There was no certificate, Hans, I said softly. That watch was engraved. You gave it to your son last year. His eyes flit to the side. All right, must have mixed it up. You know how forgetful I get. I walked closer. How did you get in? He hesitated. Then, with that same forced casualness, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a shiny brass key. My brass key. The new one. For a moment, the world went silent. No ticking clock. No rustle of paper. No hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Just silence and the hollow sound of betrayal. How did you get that? I asked. My voice was calm, but my hands trembled. He laughed awkwardly. Oh, come on, Renata. You really think a locksmith can stop family? I asked your son for a spare. He said you wouldn't mind. I felt the floor tilt under me. Max gave it to you. Hans shrugged. He thought I should have one just in case. Said you've been forgetful lately. Forgetful. The same word my son had used just days before. I took a deep breath. Hans, I want you to leave. He looked genuinely surprised. Leave? What's the matter with you? I'm just. Now, I said firmly. For a moment, he stared at me, his mouth slightly open, as if he couldn't comprehend that his older sister, the one who used to make him soup when he was sick, who loaned him money without asking questions, was drawing a line. Then he scoffed, shook his head, and muttered, You're losing it, Renata, before walking past me toward the door. The smell of his cologne lingered long after he was gone. That night, I sat at my desk for hours, staring at the papers he touched. The thought of my private things, my will, my title deeds, my savings records, in someone else's hands made my skin crawl. I wanted to call Max, to tell him everything, to shout, to demand an explanation. But when I picked up the phone, I hesitated. Because what if he really had given Hans that key? And worse, what if he didn't think he'd done anything wrong? 2 days later, I invited Max over. I told him I needed help fixing a leaking faucet. He came alone, thankfully. When he walked in, I noticed how tired he looked. But behind his eyes was something else. Guilt, maybe, or just distraction. We worked side by side in silence for a while, him under the sink, me handing him tools. It reminded me of when he was small, following Carl around the garage, trying to help with whatever he could. Finally, I couldn't hold it in any longer. Max, I said softly, did you give your uncle a copy of my house key? He froze for a second, then sighed. Mom, please don't make this a big deal. So you did. I just thought it would make things easier. Uncle Hans worries about you. You're alone out here, and what if something happened? He could check on you, without my permission. He looked up from the floor, water dripping from the pipe onto his sleeve. Mom, it's just a key. You're being paranoid. Do you know what he was doing with that key, Max? He frowned. What are you talking about? He used it to come into my home. While I was out, he went through my private papers. Max blinked, clearly thrown off. That can't be right. Uncle wouldn't. He did, I said quietly. I saw him with my own eyes. There was a long silence. Then, instead of anger, he looked weary. Mom, you're reading too much into things. You're not well lately. Maybe you imagined. I did not imagine it, I said, louder than I intended. My voice echoed off the kitchen tiles. Max stared at me, his jaw tight. Lena was right, he muttered under his breath. My stomach dropped. What did she say? He didn't answer. Just stood up, wiped his hands, and said, You're tired, Mom. I think you should rest. I'll call you later. And then he left. I stood there in the quiet, the slow drip of the faucet now the only sound. He didn't believe me. My own son thought I was losing my mind. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Instead, I felt something colder, clarity. There was no saving the illusion anymore. My kindness had become currency, and everyone had spent it freely. The locks were changed again the next morning. This time, I told no one. I even installed a small camera above the porch, not out of fear, but to finally see the truth for myself. And just 3 days later, it caught exactly what I'd suspected all along. At 10:47 a.m., while I was at the grocery store, a familiar figure walked up to the door, looking around before bending under the doormat. She pulled out a small, glinting key, one she'd hidden there herself. Lena, the moment I saw the footage, my chest tightened, not with shock, but with a strange, hollow calm. Lena, I watched her on the small screen, her movements confident and deliberate. She wasn't breaking in, she wasn't sneaking, she was acting as if she belonged there. As if this house, my home, was hers too. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, and for the next 40 minutes, I watched her on my phone screen move through the rooms like a woman inspecting property. She paused at the mantelpiece, picked up the family photos, tilted her head as though imagining which ones would stay, which ones would go. Then she did something that turned my stomach. She went straight to the study, the same place where Hans had stood days earlier. She opened drawers, sifted through folders, took pictures on her phone. At one point, she found the small jewelry box Carl had given me on our 10th anniversary. She opened it, smiled faintly, and set it down again. By the time she left, locking the door behind her, I felt something inside me quietly snap. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dim light of the kitchen, watching the footage over and over until the screen blurred. Every gesture, every smirk, every turn of her wrist when she reached for things that weren't hers, it all made sense now. The key under the mat wasn't some careless mistake. It was planted. Hans had the spare from Max. Lena had hidden her own. And my son, my sweet, distracted, blind son, had given them both permission without even realizing it. I wasn't living alone. I was living surrounded by invisible doors they'd all been walking through. The next morning, I printed 3 stills from the camera footage. One of her unlocking the door, one of her inside the study, and one as she looked directly into the camera lens, not knowing it was there. I placed them in an envelope and called Max. "Come for lunch," I said, my voice steady. "Bring Lena." He hesitated. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," I said. "Everything is perfectly fine now." They arrived just past noon. Lena came in first, her perfume drifting ahead of her, that polite smile fixed on her face. She kissed my cheek, called me mom like always, and complimented the smell of the roast in the oven. Max followed, glancing around the room with that same cautious tone he'd used the last time we spoke, the one reserved for people he thought were fragile. I waited until we'd eaten most of the meal. I didn't want anger to come too soon. I wanted silence first, the kind that holds its breath before a storm. When the plates were cleared, I set the envelope in the middle of the table. "What's this?" Max asked. "Something I think you should see." Lena reached for it first, curious. Her fingers trembled ever so slightly as she slid out the photos. The color drained from her face. "Where did you get these?" she whispered. "From the little camera above my porch," I said evenly. "I installed it after Hans let himself in. Seems I was right to." Max leaned forward, confused. "What is this, Mom?" "She has a key," I said. "Your wife. To my house. Hidden under the mat." "That's ridiculous," Lena started, but her voice faltered. "Don't lie," I said quietly. "I saw you. You came here while I was gone. You went through my things." The silence that followed was unbearable. Max stared at her, then back at me. "Lena, tell me that's not true." She swallowed hard. I was just checking on her, Max. You were worried, remember? You said she'd been acting strange lately, and I thought, acting strange, I repeated, my voice rising just a little. So strange that you needed to dig through my private documents. Her eyes filled with quick, practiced tears. "I didn't mean any harm, Mom. I wanted to make sure everything was in order. For you. For me." I laughed softly, not from humor, but from disbelief. "Or for yourself." Max looked like someone whose world had split in half. "Lena, why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't think it mattered," she snapped suddenly, the mask slipping. "I was only trying to help. You're always working, and she forgets things. What if she signed something wrong? What if she got taken advantage of?" Her voice cracked, but not from guilt, from exposure. And in that moment, I saw her for who she was. Not a worried daughter-in-law, not a caregiver, but a woman who'd mistaken my kindness for weakness, who thought she could quietly take control of the house while pretending to protect me. "I see," I said finally, my voice low. "So that's what I've become to all of you. A burden. A name on a deed you'd rather have transferred before I'm gone." "Mom, stop," Max said, his voice shaking. "That's not fair, isn't it?" I asked, looking him dead in the eye. "You gave Hans a key. She made her own. What's left for me to protect?" He looked down, speechless. For the first time in years, I saw my son not as the little boy who used to run to me with scraped knees, but as a man too afraid to face what his silence had allowed. When they finally left that afternoon, I closed the door behind them and turned the lock. For good this time. No spare keys. No under-the-mat kindness. That night, I walked through every room, touching the walls, the furniture, the photographs, reminding myself that I still owned this space. It was still mine. But as I reached the study, I saw something on the floor, a folded piece of paper that must have fallen from the folder Hans had been rummaging through. I picked it up. It was a printed email thread between Hans and someone using Lena's address. The subject line read, "About the house transfer. Legal steps before she changes the locks again." And just like that, I realized it wasn't just about a spare key anymore. It was about taking everything. I sat there for a long time, staring at that email thread, the cursor blinking on my laptop screen as if mocking me for ever believing in family loyalty. The words blurred. Transfer, ownership, power of attorney, cold legal terms that now sounded like daggers dressed in polite ink. I printed the entire conversation. Lena's messages were smooth, professional, almost polite. She spoke to Hans about ensuring Renata's comfort and streamlining the property transition before she becomes uncooperative. I laughed, a low, bitter laugh that came from somewhere deep in my chest. They had already planned for me to object. They expected it. They thought I'd resist, and that they'd have a way to make me seem unreasonable, forgetful, perhaps even senile. I could almost hear their voices rehearsing it. The quiet sympathy they'd wear when explaining to others how I wasn't managing things well anymore. But I wasn't going to give them that story. I was going to write my own. The next morning, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in months, my friend and neighbor, Agnes. She was a retired school principal, practical, sharp, and fiercely loyal. When she came over, she brought her reading glasses and a small notebook, the kind she used to use for lesson plans. "Tell me everything," she said, setting down her thermos of coffee. I did. Every detail. The keys, the camera footage, the email thread, even the lunch confrontation. By the time I finished, Agnes's expression had hardened. "This isn't just family drama, Renata. This is manipulation. They're trying to make you surrender your assets while you're still alive." "I know," I said softly, "and I don't intend to let them." Agnes nodded slowly. "You need to speak to a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. Someone who deals with elder financial abuse. I can call my niece. She works with a firm in Hamburg that specializes in cases like this." I exhaled shakily. "Do you think I have a case?" She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You don't just have a case, my dear. You have evidence." 2 days later, I found myself sitting in a polished office that smelled faintly faintly of lemon polish and paper. The lawyer's name was Mara Vogel, a calm, clear-eyed woman in her 40s who spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen every trick in the book. After I told her everything, she asked a few precise questions, then leaned back in her chair. "Mrs. Weber," she said, "what they attempted is called undue influence. It's when someone close to a vulnerable person tries to manipulate or control their financial or legal decisions for personal gain. You did the right thing by documenting it." Her words gave me something I hadn't felt in weeks: clarity. "So what do I do now?" I asked. "We start with control," she replied. "You change the locks, revoke any power of attorney documents, and file a legal notice that no property transfers can occur without your direct authorization. Then, we let them make the next move, and we'll be ready." That night, I changed every lock in the house. The locksmith, a kind young man, didn't ask questions, but when I told him I wanted no duplicates made, he looked me in the eye and nodded as though he understood more than I said. As he worked, I walked through the rooms again, not with fear this time, but with determination. This was my home. The walls still smelled faintly of the apple pie Carl used to love. The garden outside still held the rose bush he planted on our 25th anniversary. Every object here told the story of my life, not theirs. They would not rewrite it. A week later, the phone rang. "Mom!" Max's voice was hesitant. "Lena told me you changed the locks. Why would you do that?" "Because they needed changing," I said simply. He sighed. "You're still upset about the key thing, aren't you?" She didn't mean to. "Max," I interrupted gently. "Stop. I know about the emails." Silence. "What emails?" he finally said, too quickly. "The ones between your wife and Hans. The ones where they discussed transferring the house before I became, how did she put it, uncooperative." He inhaled sharply. "That's not—" "Mom, there must be some misunderstanding." "There isn't," I said. My voice didn't tremble. "I've spoken to a lawyer, and from now on, any conversations about my property will go through her." I heard his breath catch. "You hired a lawyer?" "Yes," I said, "because I love my family enough to make sure they can't hurt me again." There was a long pause, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "Mom, I never meant for things to get this far." "I know," I said. "That's the saddest part." After that call, I didn't hear from Max or Lena for several weeks. It was as if they retreated to regroup, maybe to plan a new story to tell each other about me. But something unexpected happened during that silence. I found peace. Agnes started coming by more often. We'd sit in the garden with tea and biscuits, sometimes talking, sometimes just listening to the wind move through the trees. I started painting again, something I hadn't done in years. The smell of turpentine, the texture of the canvas under my fingertips, it grounded me. It reminded me that life wasn't just about what could be taken. It was about what could still be made. For the first time in months, my house felt alive again, but this time, it belonged only to me. Then, one morning, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The return address made my stomach twist. From Weber and Sons Construction, attention, M. Weber. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It read, "Dear Mom, I think it's best if we don't see each other for a while. Things have gotten too tense, and Lena feels uncomfortable. I hope you understand. Max!" I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer beside Carl's old wristwatch. It hurt deeply, but it also confirmed what I'd already accepted. Sometimes, when you take back your keys, you lose more than access to a house. You lose access to people who never truly valued your door in the first place. That evening, I stood at the window watching the sunset spill over the garden. For the first time, I locked the door not out of fear, but out of choice. It was my home again, my peace, my silence, and for now, that was enough. When people say family matters are private, they've never lived through betrayal that echoes down every hallway of your house. You can close the doors, you can seal the windows, but the sound still travels. By late spring, word had started to spread. Not because I told anyone, but because silence always has a way of drawing attention. It began with a phone call from my church friend, Hilda. "Renata," she said cautiously, "I don't want to pry, but is everything all right between you and Max? I heard some things." I smiled into the receiver, though she couldn't see it. "Depends on what you heard." "Well, that you've become difficult, that you're paranoid about the house and keys and such." I closed my eyes for a moment. "I see," I said softly. "And who told you that?" She hesitated. "Lena stopped by the church last week. She was very concerned. Said she's worried about you being alone too much." Of course, Lena wasn't going to stay quiet. She was too clever for that. When manipulation fails in private, people like her move to public sympathy. They repaint the story, make themselves the dutiful daughter-in-law, and me the unstable widow who pushed everyone away. That Sunday, I went to church anyway. I refused to hide. When I walked in, I could feel the murmurs, the small sideways glances. It wasn't cruel, just curious, the way people look when they're trying to fit together the puzzle of gossip. After the service, Hilda came to sit beside me. "You don't have to explain anything," she said kindly. "People will talk no matter what." But I did explain, not with bitterness, but with truth. "Someone I trusted thought she could control my home," I said simply. She forgot that even quiet women know how to fight back. Hilda's hand tightened around mine. "Good," she said, "because quiet women built this town." That made me smile. From that moment, something shifted, a ripple that began to spread through my small circle. When people asked questions, they started to hear the other side of the story. Not shouted, not exaggerated, just calmly told. And that calmness, I realized, carried more power than anger ever could. But Lena didn't stop. A week later, I received received a message from the bank. Apparently, there had been an inquiry about joint access to my account. Someone had tried to present themselves as my financial representative. Only one person could have known those details. The bank official, a woman named Petra, called to confirm. "Mrs. Weber," she said carefully, "the woman claimed to be your daughter-in-law. She had your son's authorization, but of course, we required yours directly. When we called, she hung up." I thanked her, my heart beating a little too fast. "You did the right thing," I told her. Petra paused. "May I be frank with you, Mrs. Weber? Please, you're not the first. We've seen a rise in this. Family members trying to assume financial control under the guise of help. Most don't fight back until it's too late. You're one of the few who caught it early." Her words stayed with me long after the call ended. I wasn't alone in this. There were other mothers, other widows, other quiet women sitting in kitchens like mine, realizing their kindness had been mistaken for surrender. And perhaps that's when I decided this wasn't just my fight anymore. A month later, my lawyer Mara suggested we file an official complaint for attempted coercion and property interference. It wasn't about punishment, she explained. It was about creating a legal boundary that couldn't be quietly undone. Once the paperwork was filed, I assumed that would be the end of it. A line drawn, a wall built. But the news traveled faster than I expected. In small towns, court filings are public and whispers move like wildfire. By midsummer, people at the market, the pharmacy, even the post office knew something had happened between me and my son's family. I didn't hide from it anymore. When someone asked, I simply said, "Sometimes you must protect your peace, even from the people you love." That simple line, that quiet dignity, carried farther than any gossip could. Then one afternoon, as I was tending to my garden, Max appeared at the gate. He looked thinner, tired, his once carefree face lined with guilt. For a moment, I just watched him, my son, the boy I'd raised, now standing like a stranger unsure of his place. "Mom," he said softly, "can I come in?" I hesitated, then nodded. "The gate's open." He stepped through, but I noticed something immediately. He didn't reach for the door. He waited for me to open it. That, at least, he had learned. We sat in the living room, the air thick with memories. "I know about the court filing," he began. "Lena told me. She's furious." I said nothing. "She says you're trying to ruin us, that you want to make her look like a thief." I looked at him, really looked. "Do you believe that?" He swallowed hard. "I don't know what to believe anymore." I nodded. "That's fair, because you trusted her, and she trusted your silence." He flinched at that. "Max," I continued, my voice steady, "this isn't about money. It's about boundaries. When you love people, you teach them how to treat you. And for too long, I taught both of you that my kindness had no limit." He lowered his gaze, tears forming. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "I know," I said softly, "but you let her use my love as a weapon. That's what hurts most." He sat there, silent, his shoulders trembling. "She said she just wanted to secure the future," he murmured. "Then she should have built her own," I replied gently. When he left that day, I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt something different, like I had finally closed a chapter. For years, I believed motherhood meant endless giving. But maybe I thought it also meant knowing when to stop, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. Because there's a kind of love that doesn't mean saying yes. It means locking the door and sleeping peacefully for the first time in years. That night, I sat on the porch with Agnes. The evening air was cool, scented with lilacs and distant rain. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "People see now. They understand." I watched the lights flicker on in neighboring houses, families gathering for dinner, laughter echoing faintly. "Maybe," I said, "but even if they didn't, I understand myself. That's enough." The following months passed in slow, deliberate peace. I didn't expect calm to feel so heavy, but that's what happens after a storm. The silence hums with a memory of thunder. Max stopped calling. Lena, predictably, cut all ties. But life has a strange rhythm. It closes one door just to open another. I began volunteering twice a week at the community center, helping organize paperwork for seniors who struggled with technology. It started small, showing a widower how to check his bank statement online, helping an old neighbor apply for her pension. But soon, word spread that I knew about those legal tricks families pull. People started showing up with stories that sounded hauntingly familiar to mine. "My nephew keeps saying I should put the house in his name for convenience," one woman whispered. "My daughter told me she needs access to my bank in case something happens," said another. Each story carried the same pattern: love twisted into leverage, trust repackaged as care. I listened to every one of them, never interrupting, just letting them unburden themselves. And in each face, I saw a version of myself from a few months ago, scared, confused, ashamed to even suspect her own family. One afternoon, after a small workshop, a woman named Frida pulled me aside. She was in her 70s, with trembling hands and a nervous smile. "I almost gave my son my house keys last month," she confessed. "He said it was safer that way in case I fell. But after hearing your story today, I changed my mind. I told him I'd keep a spare with my neighbor instead." I smiled. "That's not distrust, Frida. That's wisdom." She squeezed my hand, eyes shining with relief. "You saved me trouble, you know. Maybe worse." I didn't say it out loud, but inside I thought, no, Frida, you saved yourself. That evening, I sat by my window watching the sun sink behind the trees, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. I realized something powerful. For years, I thought survival meant keeping my head down. But maybe, for women like me, survival means finally standing tall, not shouting, not fighting, just refusing to disappear. One morning in early autumn, I received an unexpected letter. This time, not from the bank or the court, but from Max. The envelope was thick, the handwriting hesitant. I sat at the kitchen table, took a slow breath, and opened it. Mom, I've been thinking about what you said, about silence being its own kind of betrayal. You were right. After you filed the case, things between me and Lena changed. She said I had to choose, her or you, and I did what I always do. I avoided choosing, but in doing that, I chose wrong again. I found the rest of those emails, the ones you probably didn't see. They were worse than I imagined. She had plans, things I can't even bring myself to write. I've moved out. I'm staying with a friend for now. I wanted to tell you, not to ask for forgiveness, but to say I understand now. You were never the problem. You were the only one who ever protected what mattered. Max! I sat there for a long time, tears sliding silently down my face. Not tears of anger this time, not even sadness, just the release that comes when truth finally meets the light. A week later, he came to visit. No wife, no excuses. Just Max, holding a small bouquet of white lilies, my favorite. When I opened the door, he didn't speak. He simply stepped forward and hugged me, his arms trembling. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered, for everything. For a moment, I didn't move. Then I reached up and rested my hand on the back of his head, the same gesture I used when he was a child with scraped knees. Don't be sorry, I said softly. Just be better. We sat in the kitchen for hours, sipping tea like we used to. He told me about how Lena had left after he confronted her, how she accused him of betrayal, of choosing me over her. He didn't argue. He just let her go. She said I'd regret it, he admitted. Do you? I asked. He looked around the house, his gaze settling on the old family photos, the clock ticking steadily in the corner. No, he said. For the first time, I don't. When he left that night, he didn't ask for a key, and I didn't offer one. That small understanding between us, that respect for boundaries, was worth more than any forgiveness speech could have given me. Winter came, quiet and soft. The house felt lighter now. Sometimes, when I walked through the halls, I could almost feel Carl's presence, not as a ghost, but as a memory made warm again by peace. Agnes would drop by every Thursday with cinnamon rolls, and Max started visiting every other weekend. We never talked much about what had happened. Some stories don't need retelling once the lesson is learned. Instead, we talked about small things, the garden, the weather, the old photo albums I'd begun restoring. He'd help me hang pictures, fix the squeaky door, and sometimes, when he thought I wasn't looking, he glanced toward the spot above the porch where the little camera still sat. I think he knew why I never took it down. It wasn't because I didn't trust him. It was because I'd learned that trust doesn't mean blindness. It means awareness with love. By spring, the town had stopped talking. People had moved on to other stories, other dramas, but a few women from the center still came by to ask for advice or to share small victories. I opened my own account, one would say. I told my son I'm not ready to sign over the car, said another. Every time, I'd smile and think, maybe this is what healing looks like. Not fireworks, not grand apologies, just quiet women reclaiming the keys to their lives. That night, as I locked the door before bed, I thought about something Carl used to say. You can't control who knocks, Renata, but you can control who you let in. I turned the key slowly, the click echoing in the hallway, and for the first time, that sound didn't mean fear. It meant freedom. Spring turned to summer, and the rhythm of my days became a kind of soft peace I hadn't known in years. I tended to the garden again, the same one that once felt like a battlefield of memories. The roses bloomed without judgment. The soil accepted my care without question. There's something sacred about a garden after betrayal. You learn to trust small things again, seeds, sunlight, time. They never lie. They simply give back what you give them. I spent my mornings reading by the window, and sometimes Max would join me. He'd bring coffee, sit across from me, and we'd talk about everything but the past. He was rebuilding himself too, quietly, humbly. One afternoon, he told me he was starting a small carpentry business. I want to work with my hands again, he said, not chase money or promises. I smiled. That's a good place to start. He hesitated. I'll need to store a few tools somewhere for a while. I thought maybe, I interrupted gently, you can keep them in the shed, not inside the house. He paused, then nodded with a faint smile. Fair enough. That one exchange, honest, calm, without guilt, felt like years of growth compressed into a single breath. We didn't need to rebuild what was destroyed. We only needed to understand what was left. At the community center, more people started attending the safe trust sessions I'd accidentally started. It wasn't a formal group, just a few chairs in a circle, a pot of tea, and stories shared between strangers who understood loss too well. They came with trembling voices and left with steady hands. One man said, my son wanted me to add him to my property deed. I almost did. Then I remembered your story. Another woman whispered, I told my brother I wouldn't give him my keys. He got angry, but I didn't back down. I never called myself a teacher. I wasn't one. I was just a woman who learned her lesson the hardest way possible. But sometimes, the most powerful teachers aren't the loud ones. They're the ones who survived quietly and still found the courage to speak. A local journalist eventually heard about the group and asked to interview me for an article. I hesitated at first. I didn't want fame or pity, but when she said it could help others, I agreed. She came to my house with her notepad and recorder. The same porch that once held tension now held the soft hum of cicadas and the scent of lavender. So, Mrs. Renata, she asked, if you could give one piece of advice to people about family and trust, what would it be? I looked out toward the garden, the wind brushing through the lilac bushes Carl had planted decades ago. Love your family, I said, but love yourself with the same strength. Don't mistake access for affection. A key isn't a gift, it's a boundary, and boundaries protect love from turning into ownership. She wrote that down carefully, her pen trembling slightly. Then she asked, and what happened to your daughter-in-law? I smiled faintly. Nothing happened to her. Life took care of that. Because it had. A few months earlier, I heard from an old friend that Lena had moved to another city. Word was, she tried starting a small business but struggled. I didn't rejoice or curse her name. I simply wished her peace. Some lessons come through pain, others through loss. I had already received mine. After the article was published, I started getting letters from strangers. Some handwritten, others typed. One woman wrote, I watched my brother drain our mother's account. I didn't speak up. Your story gave me courage to confront him. A retired teacher wrote, I never realized I was being manipulated until I heard your words about boundaries. Thank you. I'd sit by my kitchen table reading these letters, one by one, sometimes with tears, sometimes with a soft smile. I kept them in a wooden box, not because they praised me, but because they reminded me why I survived. Each one was proof that truth, once spoken, keeps traveling, even when the voice grows quiet. One rainy afternoon, Max came over again. He looked different, lighter, freer. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a set of brand new house keys. He said softly, these are for you, Mom. I made new locks for the front and back door. Stronger ones. I smiled. You didn't have to. I know, he said, but I wanted you to know, this house, this peace, it's safe. And this time, you're the only one who decides who gets a key. I reached out and held his hand. Then let's keep it that way. We both laughed quietly. That night, I sat by the window again, the rain tapping against the glass like an old lullaby. I thought about all the doors I'd opened in my life, to people, to pain, to lessons, and I realized something simple but powerful. Every time someone betrays you, they don't just steal trust, they give you the chance to rebuild it stronger. And every time you close a door, you aren't shutting people out, you're keeping your peace in. Months later, the journalist sent me a copy of the printed magazine. My picture was small, tucked in the corner, but the headline read, The Woman Who Locked the Door and Opened a Conversation. I laughed softly when I saw it. Carl would have liked that. I placed the magazine in the same drawer where I kept the first set of court papers, the ones that started it all. One represented loss, the other redemption. As the sun set that evening, I stepped outside, barefoot on the damp grass, and whispered a quiet prayer, not for protection, but for peace. I didn't need locks or cameras anymore. I had something stronger. Clarity. Because once you understand who to never give your keys to, you also understand who deserves to be let in. Kindness, patience, and maybe, if life allows it, a second chance. But just when I thought the story had finally closed, a familiar knock echoed on my door one evening, and when I opened it, I froze. It wasn't Max. It wasn't Agnes. It was someone I never expected to see again. The evening was unusually quiet. The rain had stopped an hour ago, leaving the world slick and silver under the dim porch light. I just poured myself a cup of chamomile tea when I heard the knock. It wasn't a polite tap. It was hesitant, uneven, the kind that carries both shame and hope. When I opened the door, I froze. It was Lena. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with gray that hadn't been there before. Her clothes were simple, a worn cardigan, jeans that had seen better days. Her eyes, once sharp and defiant, were tired, almost fragile. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The sound of rain dripping from the roof filled the silence between us. Renata, she whispered. I wasn't sure you'd open the door. I took a slow breath. I almost didn't. She looked down, her hands trembling around a small plastic folder. I needed to see you. One last time. I didn't invite her in right away. There are doors you can open physically, and then there are the ones inside you, the ones that require thought. After a pause, I stepped aside. Come in, but only for a little while. She nodded, grateful and uneasy, and stepped into the house she once walked through so freely. The living room was warm, softly lit by the yellow glow of the lamp. Lena stood by the mantel, eyes wandering over the photos. Carl and I on our wedding day. Max as a child with frosting on his cheek, the family dog asleep by the fireplace. She looked like she was visiting a ghost. Everything looks the same, she said softly. Some things don't need changing, I replied. She gave a weak smile and sat down, her eyes never meeting mine for long. I know I have no right to be here, she began, but I needed to tell you something before I leave town for good. I folded my hands in my lap, waiting. I lost everything, she said quietly. The business, the savings, even the apartment. After Max left me, things fell apart. I made bad choices, trusted worse people. I thought I was smarter than everyone else. Her voice cracked slightly, and for the first time, I saw not the scheming woman who tried to control my life, but a broken one, hollowed out by her own ambition. I wanted to hate you for everything that happened, she continued. But the truth is, I did this to myself. I said nothing. Sometimes silence is the kindest form of truth. She placed the plastic folder on the table. These are papers, the last of Max's old accounts. I kept them by mistake. They belong to you. I didn't touch them. I just looked at her. Why bring them now? Her eyes listened, because I couldn't stand knowing I still had something that wasn't mine. I wanted to make it right. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked softly. The rain whispered against the window. Finally, I said, you hurt a lot of people, Lena. You used trust like a weapon. She nodded, tears tears slipping down her cheeks. I know, and I'll never forgive myself for it. I leaned forward slightly. Then don't ask others to. Learn to live differently. That's the only forgiveness that matters. She looked up at me, eyes wide, not in defiance this time, but understanding. You're stronger than I thought, she said quietly. I always was, I answered. You just never looked closely enough. After that, she stood up, ready to leave. At the door, she hesitated. Do you think people like me deserve peace? She asked softly. I looked at her for a long moment. Yes, but not before they earn it. She nodded. Then, with a small, trembling smile, she whispered, thank you for at least opening the door. And just like that, she was gone. The night air rushed in behind her, cold but cleansing. I closed the door gently and locked it, feeling no anger, no triumph, just stillness. Later, I sat back down with my tea, now cold, and stared at the folder she'd left. I finally opened it. Inside were a few old bank papers, a photo of Max as a boy, and a short handwritten note on the back. It read, you were right about keys, Renata. Some of us never deserve them. Not to houses, not to hearts. I exhaled slowly. The words didn't bring pain. They brought closure. For years, I thought locking my doors meant shutting people out. But that night, I understood. I hadn't locked anyone out. I had simply unlocked myself. A few weeks later, Max came by again. I told him about Lena's visit. He listened quietly, then said, maybe that's her way of saying goodbye. Maybe, I said. Or maybe it's her way of starting over. He smiled faintly. And you? Have you started over too? I looked out at the garden, the roses swaying in the gentle wind, the lilacs just starting to bloom again. Yes, I said. I think I finally have. He squeezed my shoulder, and for the first time in years, I felt a calm that wasn't temporary. It was real, earned. As the months passed, the phrase I once dreaded, family keys, became something else entirely. To me, a key was no longer metal and teeth. It was trust, presence, respect. And I realized there are 3 types of family members you should never give your keys to. The entitled one, who believes love means access. The manipulative one, who twists kindness into control. The careless one, who doesn't mean harm but leaves doors open for others to enter and hurt you. Because no matter how much you love them, you can't build peace in a house without boundaries. Now, when I close my door each night, I whisper to myself, only those who knock with care will ever enter again. And somehow, that feels like both a promise and a prayer. When I look back now, I realize that doors aren't just made of wood and hinges, they're made of trust. Every time you hand someone a key, you're giving them a part of your peace, your privacy, your safety. And not everyone deserves that. Sometimes, it takes losing the wrong people to understand how precious your peace truly is. I used to think love meant always saying yes, that keeping the door open meant keeping a family together. But I've learned sometimes love means locking it, standing behind it, and saying no more. Because the ones who truly care will never need a key to prove their place in your life. They'll knock, they'll wait, and they'll respect whatever answer you give. Maybe you've been there too, trusting someone who took advantage of your kindness. Maybe you've been afraid that closing a door would make you cruel. But let me tell you something, protecting your peace isn't cruelty, it's courage. If you ever find yourself torn between keeping someone close and keeping yourself safe, choose yourself every time. Because when you do, you're not losing a person, you're gaining your freedom. So tonight, as you lock your own doors, take a moment to think about who really deserves your keys to your home, to your heart, to your time. And ask yourself this, would you have opened the door like I did? Or would you have let it stay closed for good? Tell me what you think in the comments below, because your stories, your lessons, and your courage might be exactly what someone else needs to hear tonight. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next one. Because somewhere out there, another story like mine is waiting to be told.